When I got a promotion, my uncle saw it at dinner. Guess the company was desperate. My dad added, "We're still waiting for you to do something impressive." I quietly said, "Noted." That was 3 years ago. This week, they found out just how impressive I've become. Obligatory, this happened 3 years ago disclaimer, but the aftermath is still unfolding. Buckle up. This is going to be a long one. I, 31M, grew up as the permanent disappointment in my family. Nothing new there. Probably half of you can relate. My dad Philip, 58, and his brother, my uncle Adriel, 55, run this local construction supply business that my grandfather started. The business has been their entire personality since before I was born. Dad wanted me to join straight out of high school, but I chose college instead. Strike one. When I graduated with a business degree, they offered me an entry-level position to learn the ropes, aka answer phones and get coffee, while being lectured about how useless my education was compared to real experience. I lasted 8 months before finding a job at another company. Strike two. For context, my uncle has 2 kids who worship the ground he walks on and work for the family business. My dad never lets me forget how my cousins understand family loyalty. Meanwhile, I'm the black sheep who abandoned the legacy. Whatever. So 3 years ago, after busting my ass for that other company for 4 years, I finally got promoted to team lead. It wasn't anything extraordinary, but it was the first time I felt like my hard work was being recognized. I was genuinely proud of myself. Big mistake. I decided to share my news at Sunday dinner, which has been a family tradition since forever. These dinners are basically a weekly opportunity for Dad and Uncle Adriel to brag about business wins, while my mom Anita and Aunt Bernice nod supportively. My sister Hope, 28, usually manages to escape these torture sessions since she moved to another state, but I still went because, well, Stockholm Syndrome probably. So there I was, waiting for the right moment to share my news. The conversation had finally shifted away from business, and everyone was in a decent mood after my mom's lasagna. I casually mentioned that I had some good news. I'd gotten promoted at work and would be leading my own team starting next month. You know that moment when the record scratches in movies? Yeah. The entire table went completely silent. I remember how my fork scraped against the plate, sounding like a jet engine in the quiet. My uncle was the first to break the silence, the side of his mouth curled up in that smirk I've come to hate. He said that my company must have been truly desperate to put me in charge of anything. I felt my face burning, but before I could respond, my dad jumped in. He told me they were still waiting for me to do something actually impressive with my life. Then they both laughed, like it was the funniest joke they'd heard all year. My mom tried to salvage the situation by asking about my new responsibilities, but the damage was done. 28 years of their belittling comments flashed through my mind in an instant. Every soccer game they missed, every report card they dismissed, every achievement they minimized, all because I didn't worship their precious family business. Something inside me just snapped, but not in the way they expected. Instead of exploding or storming out, which was probably what they wanted, I simply nodded and said, "Noted." That's it. Just that one word. Then I changed the subject and asked my aunt about her garden. The look of confusion on my dad's face was almost worth the humiliation. Almost. I drove home that night with my knuckles white on the steering wheel, replaying the moment over and over in my head. I'd spent my entire life trying to earn their approval, and for what? To be publicly mocked at a family dinner? The next morning, I called in sick and spent the day making a plan. Not a career plan or a life plan, a revenge plan. I know how that sounds, but after almost 3 decades of psychological warfare, something in me hardened. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was furious. Step 1. I needed to understand my enemy. I've always known my dad and uncle were assholes, but their business was their weak point. So I started researching everything about their company, their clients, their suppliers, their competitors. I scoured their outdated website and social media, which was basically non-existent because they still thought Facebook was newfangled nonsense. I created a Google Doc with everything I could find. Their business was old school, running on relationships and handshakes instead of contracts and modern systems. They were proud of this, calling it the way business should be done. In reality, they were dinosaurs refusing to acknowledge the meteor. Step 2. I needed resources. I doubled down at my job, working harder than ever. The promotion I'd received gave me access to industry contacts I hadn't had before. I absorbed everything I could, built relationships, and started quietly developing a network outside my company. LinkedIn became my best friend, though I made sure to keep my profile boring AF, so no family members would get suspicious. I set up a separate bank account and started saving aggressively. Revenge isn't free, and I needed capital for what I was planning. Step 3. I learned everything about their industry. I took online courses at night, read industry publications, joined forums where suppliers and contractors hung out. I identified pain points in the market that my dad and uncle were too stubborn to address. Their business model was practically a museum exhibit, inefficient, expensive, and completely resistant to change. For 6 months, I lived like a monk. Work, research, plan, sleep, repeat. My friends thought I was going through some kind of quarter-life crisis. Maybe I was. All I know is that every time I thought about quitting, I remembered that dinner. I remembered 28 years of not being good enough. I remembered the word noted coming out of my mouth like a promise. Then came the opportunity I'd been waiting for. Through my network, I heard that one of my dad and uncle's biggest clients was frustrated with their outdated systems and constant delays. This client had a massive project coming up, but was considering other suppliers. I reached out to an old college friend who worked in tech development. Together, we started building something that would make my dad and uncle's business look like a horse and buggy compared to a Tesla. My parents noticed I wasn't coming to as many Sunday dinners. When I did show up, I kept conversations vague. My dad would occasionally ask about my little promotion, with that same dismissive tone. I'd just smile and say things were fine. Meanwhile, I was preparing to burn their kingdom to the ground. I didn't just want success for myself. I wanted them to see me achieve it. I wanted them to know it was me who took everything from them. I wanted them to understand that their dismissal of me was the biggest mistake of their lives. At the 1-year mark post-dinner, I took the first real step. I registered my own LLC with a name similar enough to be confused with their company, but different enough to avoid legal issues. My business model addressed every single weakness in theirs: online ordering, transparent pricing, efficient delivery, modern inventory system. I was still working my regular job, building my revenge business on nights and weekends. The exhaustion was real, but so was my determination. Every time I wanted to give up, I'd write, "Guess the company was desperate," and "Still waiting for you to do something impressive," on a post-it, and stick it to my monitor. By the 18-month mark, I had secured startup funding from an investor who loved my business model. I finally quit my job to focus full-time on my company. When my dad heard I'd quit to do some internet business thing, he laughed and told everyone I was having a midlife crisis. My uncle suggested I'd come crawling back to them for a job within 6 months. I smiled and said nothing, but in my head, I was already counting down the days until they realized exactly what I was building and who I was building it to destroy. That was a 1.5 years ago. Next update will cover what happened when my business went live and started directly competing with theirs. Update. Hey Reddit. OP from the "Guess the Company Was Desperate" post here. Many of you asked for an update, so here it is. Shit has been getting real asterisk in the past year. First, thanks for all the support on my last post. The validation that I'm not crazy for wanting revenge honestly helped me stay focused during some tough moments. And to the people who DM'd me saying I should be the bigger person and forgive family, MAO, that ship sailed when they humiliated me for the 500th time. This isn't about being petty. It's about justice. So when I left off, I was just getting my competing business off the ground. For those who need a refresher, my dad and uncle have run their construction supply business for decades, constantly belittling me for not joining them. When I got promoted at my old job and shared the news at family dinner, They laughed and said they were still waiting for me to do something impressive. I quietly said, "Noted," and began plotting their downfall. The first 6 months of running my business were brutal. I was working 16-hour days, surviving on ramen and energy drinks, and sleeping maybe 4 hours a night. My apartment looked like a crime scene wall, with sticky notes and whiteboards everywhere. The shower in my bathroom stopped working for 2 weeks, and I barely noticed because I was showering at the gym anyway. Peak adulting, I know. My business model directly targeted everything my dad and uncle were doing wrong, which was basically everything. Their customer service was garbage, their pricing was confusing AF, and their tech was straight out of 1995. Meanwhile, I built a sleek website with transparent pricing, a next-day delivery guarantees, and an actual inventory system that wasn't a clipboard hanging on a nail in a warehouse. Revolutionary, right? The real game changer came when I figured out who handled their delivery. This guy Marcus had worked for my dad for 15 years and was treated like absolute trash. One night, after some LinkedIn reconnaissance, I accidentally ran into him at a local bar. We got to talking, and I casually mentioned my new venture. By the end of the night, I knew every single one of their major client accounts, pricing structures, and delivery schedule. Ethically questionable? Maybe. But after watching my dad and uncle exploit people for decades, I had zero guilt. Armed with this intel, I started making targeted moves. I'd undercut their pricing by just enough to be attractive, but not so much that I couldn't sustain it. When one of their loyal customers would hesitate, I'd offer a first-time discount that made it impossible to say no. Basic business strategy, but it was working. The first time I stole a major client from them, I treated myself to the most expensive whiskey at the liquor store, sat on my balcony in the middle of winter, freezing my ass off, but feeling warmer than I had in years. Around month 8, I got my first taste of their panic. My cousin Hope texted me out of the blue asking if I knew anything about a new competitor in town that was causing problems for Dad and Uncle Adriel. I played dumb, acting surprised they were having issues at all. Hope mentioned that Dad had been coming home in increasingly foul moods, slamming doors and yelling about disloyal customers. I saved that text conversation as my new phone wallpaper for a while. By the 1-year mark of my business, I'd poached 6 of their major accounts, but that wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel true desperation, so I executed Phase 2, Employee Extraction. Their warehouse manager Dominic had been with them for 20 years. The guy knew every product, every supplier, and every workaround for their archaic systems. He also had a son with special needs who needed therapy that their crappy health insurance barely covered. I offered him a 30% pay increase and premium health coverage. He accepted within 48 hours. When Dominic left, their warehouse operations went into chaos. Orders got mixed up. Deliveries went to wrong addresses. Inventory counts became a guessing game. Meanwhile, my operation was running smoother than ever with Dominic's expertise. Dad called me on a Tuesday night, which was unusual since we barely spoke outside of Sunday dinners, which I'd been attending less and less. He sounded tired. He asked if I was free for lunch that week, just the two of us. Something about reconnecting. For a split second, my resolve wavered. Maybe he was actually reflecting on his behavior. Maybe he missed me? Nope. At lunch, he spent 20 minutes ranting about some new tech-obsessed supplier stealing his business, then casually asked if my internet thing was making enough money for me to consider a loan to the family business. They were having temporary cash flow issues. I nearly spit out my water. The audacity of this man asking me for money while still not even bothering to learn what my business actually did. I told him I was barely breaking even, but would keep his request in mind. Then I went home and immediately finalized my offer to steal their biggest remaining client. That client was a regional developer who accounted for almost 25% of their annual revenue. I'd been courting them for months. The day after my lunch with Dad, I offered them a deal they couldn't refuse, matching my parents' pricing, but with guaranteed delivery dates, a user-friendly ordering system, and a dedicated account manager. They signed a 2-year contract the following week. When that client jumped ship, It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. My uncle stopped coming to Sunday dinners. My dad aged 10 years in a month. My mom started asking concerned questions about their retirement savings. I just kept showing up, eating lasagna, and asking innocent questions about how business was going. The psychological warfare was almost as satisfying as the financial damage. My plan hit a snag when one of my delivery trucks broke down, causing me to miss some deadlines with the big new client. For 48 hours, I thought I'd blown everything. I scrambled to rent replacement vehicles and personally drove deliveries at 5 a.m. to keep things on track. Nearly crashed my car, falling asleep at the wheel. Not my proudest moment, but I refused to fail. By month 15, I was ready for the kill shot. I'd compiled documentation of every corner they'd cut over the years. Safety regulations ignored, taxes fudged, employees misclassified. Nothing major enough for serious legal trouble, but enough to make any potential buyers think twice during due diligence if they tried to sell the business. I anonymously sent copies to their 3 remaining major clients, positioned as concerns from an industry insider. 2 dropped them within weeks. Yesterday, I drove past their warehouse. The parking lot was half empty. A for lease sign had appeared on their secondary storage building. Through the industry grapevine, I heard they're considering strategic options, which everyone knows is business speak for "we're fucked." The thing is, I'm not even done yet. My final move is approaching, and it's going to make everything so far look like a warm-up. I've been meeting with investors who are interested in expanding my operation. The plan? Acquire my dad and uncle's failing business at a fraction of its value, absorb their remaining clients, then give them the option to either work under my management or retire with significantly less than they'd planned. Their entire lives, their entire identities are wrapped up in that business. Taking it from them won't just hurt financially, it'll break them psychologically, exactly how they tried to break me year after year. Sunday dinner is tomorrow. I've confirmed with my mom that Dad and Uncle Adriel will both be there, probably to discuss their situation with the family. I'll be showing up with acquisition paperwork in my bag, ready to slide it across the table when they inevitably start talking about their mysterious competitor who's destroying them. The look on their faces when they realize it's been me all along, that's going to be worth every all-nighter, every penny spent, every moment of the last 3 years. Update 2. First off, holy shit, Reddit. The response to my last 2 posts has been insane. My inbox is in shambles, but I promised a final update, so here we go. Buckle up, because Sunday dinner went down, and it was everything I'd been planning for 3 years, and then some. Quick recap for those just joining. My dad Philip and Uncle Adriel have spent my entire life belittling me. When I got a promotion 3 years ago, they mocked me at family dinners, saying they were still waiting for me to do something impressive. I quietly said, "Noted," and spent 3 years building a competing business that systematically destroyed theirs. Until Sunday, they had no idea I was behind their downfall. The day started with my hot water heater deciding to die, because of course it would on the most important day of my revenge arc. Took a freezing shower, which honestly helped clear my head. Drove to my parents' house with a folder of acquisition papers and a USB drive with a presentation I'd spent way too much time perfecting. My hands were actually shaking on the steering wheel, not from nerves, but from this weird electric anticipation that made my skin feel too tight. I arrived about 15 minutes late on purpose. Walking up the driveway, I noticed Uncle Adriel's car was parked crookedly, taking up half my mom's spot. Typical entitled behavior from him. The smell of Mom's lasagna hit me as soon as I opened the door, but the usual Sunday dinner chatter was missing. Instead, there was this heavy silence, broken only by the sound of forks scraping against plates. Everyone looked up when I walked in. My mom, Anita's eyes were puffy and red-rimmed. Dad looked like he'd aged another decade since I'd seen him last. His face gray and drawn, with bags under his eyes that could carry groceries. Uncle Adriel wouldn't even look it. My Aunt Bernice was fidgeting with her napkin, folding and unfolding it like it was the most important task in the world. Even my cousins were there, which was unusual for a regular Sunday dinner. They sat on either side of Uncle Adriel like bodyguards, but their usual swagger was gone. My cousin Hope gave me a weak smile that didn't reach her eyes. I apologized for being late, some bullshit about traffic, and slid into my usual seat. My mom immediately started fussing, spooning lasagna onto my plate that I knew I wouldn't be able to eat with the adrenaline pumping through me. The tension was so thick you could have cut it with the butter knife sitting unused next to my plate. Dad cleared his throat and informed everyone they had an announcement. The business was filing for bankruptcy on Monday. They'd lost too many clients, couldn't make payroll, and their last-ditch effort to secure financing had fallen through yesterday. They'd be closing their doors after 42 years in business. My aunt immediately started crying. One of my cousins put his head in his hands. The other one started angrily ranting about disloyal customers and unfair competition. Hope stared at her plate, pushing food around without eating. And me? I felt a calm settle over me that I hadn't experienced in years. This was it, the moment I'd been working toward. I asked what happened, my voice carefully neutral. Uncle Adriel finally looked at me, his face twisted with anger. He spat out that some tech-obsessed upstart had systematically stolen their clients, poached their employees, and undercut their prices until they had nothing left. Dad added that the worst part was they still didn't even know who was behind it. The competitor operated mostly online, with minimal physical presence. They'd tried to arrange meetings to discuss potential partnerships, but the owner always declined, almost like they had something personal against them. I looked down at my lasagna to hide the smile I couldn't contain. Took a bite to buy myself some time. The food tasted like victory. After listening to about 10 minutes of them playing the victims, blaming the economy, ungrateful employees, disloyal customers, literally everyone except themselves, I casually asked what the competitor's business was called. The table went quiet again as Dad said the name of my company. I nodded thoughtfully, took a sip of water, and said I'd actually heard of them. They were supposed to be really innovative, weren't they? Uncle Adriel snorted, muttering something about flashy websites and unrealistic promises. Dad said what they did wasn't real business. Real business was built on relationships and handshakes, not algorithms and apps. That was my cue. I reached for my bag beside my chair and pulled out my folder. Asked if they'd ever tried contacting the owner directly. They both started talking over each other about unreturned calls and dodged meeting. I slid the folder across the table toward my dad, told him he might want to take a look at this. He opened it with that dismissive expression he always wore when humoring me, started scanning the first page of acquisition documents, with my name and company listed at the top. It took about 10 seconds for his face to change. His eyes widened, darting between the paper and my face. He'd gone completely pale, like all the blood had drained from his body. Uncle Adriel asked what was wrong, and Dad just silently handed him the document. The look on Uncle Adriel's face as he realized what he was reading, who he was reading about, was worth every sleepless night of the past 3 years. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. He kept shaking his head as if denying what was right in front of him. My mom asked what was happening. I calmly explained that I was offering to acquire what remained of their business assets at 20 cents on the dollar. A generous offer considering their current financial situation. I'd retain the warehouse and 3 of their remaining employees, but unfortunately, there wouldn't be positions for either my father or uncle in the restructured organization. The shitstorm that followed was epic. Uncle Adriel flipped his plate, sending lasagna flying across the table. My cousins started yelling. Dad just sat there staring at me like he was seeing a ghost. When everyone finally quieted down, thanks to my mom practically screaming for silence, I pulled out the USB drive, plugged it into my tablet, and turned it toward them. It was a simple slide presentation showing the growth of my company over 3 years, directly correlated with their decline. The client list I'd taken, the employees I'd poached, the strategic moves I'd made to dismantle what they'd built. And on the final slide, a screenshot of a text document with just 2 lines. Guess the company was desperate. Still waiting for you to do something impressive. The room went deadly silent. Dad's face had crumpled. not in sadness, but in this weird mix of shock and dawning comprehension. Uncle Adriel was vibrating with rage, his face red, a vein pulsing in his forehead that looked ready to burst. That's when my dad asked, in a voice I barely recognized, why I would do this to my own family. The fucking audacity of that question, after decades of emotional abuse, nearly made me laugh. Instead, I reminded him of that dinner 3 years ago, and every dismissive comment before that, every achievement ignored, every effort belittled. I told them I'd simply taken their lifetime of lessons to heart, that family loyalty meant nothing, that ruthlessness was respected, and that the only thing that mattered was winning. I stood up, thanked my mom for dinner, and told my dad and uncle they had 48 hours to accept my offer before I withdrew it, and they lost everything. Then I walked out, the sound of my aunt sobbing and my cousins arguing fading behind me. In my car, I sat for a minute breathing in the cool evening air. My phone started blowing up with text. Hope asking what the hell just happened. My mom begging me to come back and talk things through. My cousins with various threats. I ignored them all and drove home. That was 3 days ago. This morning I received signed acquisition papers from both my dad and uncle. Their lawyer had advised them it was their only option to avoid complete financial ruin. So here I am, at 31, owner of what was once my family's legacy business. Dad hasn't spoken to me since Sunday. Uncle Adriel sent a rambling email that alternated between threatening legal action and begging for a job. My mom keeps calling, trying to mediate a reconciliation that's never going to happen. I don't feel the overwhelming joy I expected. It's more like a quiet, steady satisfaction, like finally putting down a heavy weight I've been carrying for years. There's a certain emptiness, too. The goal that's been driving me is suddenly accomplished. But when I remember their faces as they realized who had systematically destroyed everything they valued, the moment they understood that the son they'd dismissed had become the architect of their downfall, that memory is fucking priceless. So what's next? I'm expanding the business into 2 neighboring states. The employee who left Dad's company for mine is now my operations director, and I've hired one of my cousins, the only one who called to apologize for how I'd been treated all these years. As for my father and uncle, they're learning what it's like to be irrelevant, just as they always made me feel.